Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I hope everyone is enjoying what is already a very beautiful day outside. I'm thrilled for everyone to be here for this conversation with Teresa Baker about her work and about her exhibition, Somewhere Between Earth and Sky. A few little housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's talk is being recorded, and we'll post it to our website in the coming weeks in case you'd like to revisit it or even share it with friends. I'd also ask everybody to take a moment to please silence your cell phones. And you'll be able to join us after the talk for an activation of Haegu Yang's sculpture, Mound Vehicles. My sincere thanks are due to CAM's staff and seasonal installation crew, Kevin, Tara, Kellen, Mad, Gertie, Jackson, and Tehran, for their helping hands, vision, contributions, and assistance as this exhibition was pulled together. CAM's staff members have brought their time and talents to this effort, helping to see possibilities and challenges in mounting this exhibition and surmounting them. I thank our executive director, Lisa Melandri, for her support and enthusiasm, and associate curator, Misa Jeffries, for her curatorial efforts and for being such a generous thought partner for this and every exhibition season. Following our conversation, Misa will come to the podium to say a few words to introduce the activation of Yang's Mound Vehicles. Thanks also to Learning and Engagement Director Michelle December and Visitor Experience and Events Manager Jenna McNeil for planning and preparing this space for us this morning. I'd also like to single out the newest member of CAM's staff, Registrar and Exhibition Production Manager Erica Buss, who joined our team and met the challenges of organizing this exhibition unflappably with knowledge and enthusiasm, as well as Grace Early, Exhibitions Assistant, whose contributions to CAM's curatorial department are indeed invaluable. CAM's exhibitions are truly collective efforts. Thanks to Teresa's partner, Michael, for his efforts towards the realization of this exhibition. His support is stalwart. Somewhere Between Earth and Sky has been funded in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, Jane and Robert Clark, Ferring Family Foundation, Shireen and Michael Fisher, Penny Pennington and Michael Fiddler, Marianne and Andy Srenko, and Whitaker Foundation. I thank them all. Teresa Baker's artworks have also come to us from far and wide, thanks to Jessica and Marwan Bitar, Sarah Carter, Gotchman Family Collection, Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art, Mary Patricia Anderson Pence, Dr. Jennifer Stevens, Tia Collection, lenders who prefer to remain anonymous, David DeBoer and DeBoer Gallery in Los Angeles and in Antwerp, Pascal Spengeman and Broadway Gallery in New York for sharing the artworks in this exhibition with us. And now, a bit about Teresa. Teresa was born in Watford City, North Dakota, and until recently lived and worked in Los Angeles, though is currently relocating to Montana. She is an enrolled member of the 3 affiliated tribes in western North Dakota. Baker received a BA from Fordham University in 2008 and an MFA from California College of the Arts in 2013. She has exhibited widely at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, Prospect 6 Triennial in New Orleans, the Arts Club of Chicago, CCA's Wattis Institute for Contemporary Arts, and Yerba Buena, both in San Francisco, the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art in Overland Park, Kansas, and the Art Museum of Southeast Texas in Beaumont. Her works are held in the collections of the Anderson Collection at Stanford University, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Nerman Museum, Yale University Art Gallery, and the Portland Museum of Art in Maine. She's been an artist in residence at Fogo Island Arts, McDowell, and the Headland Center for the Arts, and is the recipient of a 2020 Native American Fellowship for Visual Artists at UCross Foundation. She's represented by David de Boer Gallery in Los Angeles and Antwerp, and Broadway Gallery in New York. In April, she'll have a show with Stefan Friedman Gallery in London, and we're delighted to have her and her family here with us today. Thanks so much, Teresa. And I think you have a few words too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dean. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning. I first want to thank Dean, who's been incredible to work with. They've been so thoughtful through the whole process of this show. And Dean first saw my work in Beaumont, Texas in 2015, maybe. So yeah, a long history there. And anyway, thank you so much for your intuition and real thoughtfulness in this show. I also want to thank the museum staff and all the installers. You know, as an artist, I spend so much time alone in my studio, and I do love it that way, but nothing happens without so many people to put this on, and I'm eternally grateful for installers who install the work so beautifully and mindfully, and to everyone here at the museum, thank you so much. I also, want to say thank you to my family. So I have some in-laws in the audience, Carrie and Sharon Mason, who live here in St. Louis, and I'm so glad they can be here. And my sister-in-law, Jessica Viator, who flew in from DC to be here. And of course to my husband, who's not here because he's wrangling our 3 tiny children, but he's the reason that I can do any of this. So I really appreciate him. Coming into this show for the first time, it has so much history for me. There's always this personal history. And besides remembering where each piece was made, I also remember where it was shown and kind of the first iterations of where it was shown in various places. So there's a few pieces that were shown at the Nerman Museum with Joanne Northrup, and then the Arts Club of Chicago with Janine Millieff, and they're both here in the audience today. So there's a lot of support, and also my gallerist, David de Boer from LA, who also makes all of this happen. So thank you all so much. And that's it, yeah.
Excellent. So Teresa, I think maybe a nice place to start actually is some of the history. Yeah. And I think one of the things that is especially special about your work is the materiality of it. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you can talk with us a little bit about what it was to be in Beaumont and to come across the artificial turf that has become a real kind of mainstay of your practice, and what the challenges were, what brought you to that material?
Yeah, so really the only way to talk about AstroTurf is to kind of talk about the 10 years before it, which was searching. A lot of my practice is process-based, so that involves so much experimentation, a lot of failure, and searching for what was going to be my canvas, basically. And I was young, I was undergrad, grad school, I was trying everything, canvas and paint, and I tried felt and polyurethane foam, and I really went through so many iterations to understand what is my abstract language, to really learn how to add to the conversation and the history of abstraction and what feels like me. And so when I went to Beaumont, which was, I guess, post-grad school, I was still really kind of searching for that canvas. And so I walked into the magical store of Home Depot, and there was a bright blue AstroTurf, and I was kind of, sort of floored. I'm from North Dakota and grew up a lot in the upper Midwest region. And we don't have AstroTurf. Of course, I knew what it was, but it had this lovely kind of foreign feeling to it. And so I thought I would try it. I would give it a try. And once I took it back to the studio and I laid the yarn down to kind of shape it, because I also am always looking for what can hold a shape, what doesn't need a backing, so it has to have these inherent properties. So I had all this criteria of what I was searching for. and AstroTurf was the answer. And I have this really lovely artist friend who has seen my practice kind of evolve through many years. And I sent her a picture of this yarn on AstroTurf without saying anything. And she was like, "You figured it out." And I was like, and here we are, still using that material. But, I think a lot about landscape in my work. One thing I've kind of figured out as I was looking at abstraction, thinking about formal materials and formal kind of relationships in the composition was, it's not just pure form for me. It's actually, how do you get a feeling into something that's static? How do you get a feeling into an object? And that's really a huge driving force for what keeps me going to the studio. And so trying to kind of align all the materials in the right way was really important.
I mean, I think one thing that's actually a fun side note, is that AstroTurf was actually invented here in St. Louis, which makes this feel like a bit of a homecoming in some way or another. But I think one thing that actually is really interesting is that you're working within this idiom that constantly negotiates between abstraction and representation, thinking about shape and thinking about form. And for me, the artificial turf is a really effective way to do that, because when we think about landscape, if we think about a work in the other room like Good Weather, it almost feels as though you're flying over the plains and kind of looking down and seeing a kind of done, fall grass colors, things like that. Yeah. And I wonder, but then there's also, as we look at this behind us, the kind of twinkle that it has that almost feels like reflections on water, things like that. And so I wonder how quickly you came to understand those possibilities, both for the ways that it could benefit you within an abstract idiom, but also within a kind of more representational idiom.
Well, I think fairly quickly, but in the beginning it was a lot of really trying to understand the material and what it could do, but it was so instantly, it's so textural, and the process of using and working with it becomes very felt, and it becomes, this can be this giant, spacious expanse that all of a sudden becomes landscape that I've kind of been wanting and searching for. And so I think it was, it was a pretty quick realization that I could get to that point. And to kind of think about in terms of representation and abstraction too is also when finding AstroTurf was also the point where I realized I could bring in my own cultural materials. And so up until that point, I had been knowing that I needed to understand my language before I could really bring in buckskin, willow, buffalo hide, things like that. And then all of a sudden, they were allowed to become another form. Like there was that kind of desire to push expectations all of a sudden happened, and it grounded the artifice of the AstroTurf, and then it added a whole other dimension and conversation of representation of history. So yeah, it was just this kind of perfect thing. So.
I think too, the other thing that really strikes me, because I remember kind of seeing some of those earlier works, that they were a bit more modest in scale than they are right now. Yeah. And I think that notion of the kind of connection to landscape is really much bolder, because we see these works at a scale that I can imagine projecting myself into, right? They're things that feel like they can surround us. And I wonder what that growth in scale was like for you.
Well, some of it it's because it really is so processed. So it is these failures. I think failure is actually just so important, and but it was understanding how much I could continue to push the AstroTurf, and then all of a sudden, how much I'm adding paint, and then all of a they are growing. They're growing. I mean, we have the hanging piece there in the middle, and that's one of the larger pieces I've made to this point. And so, but there's a practicality in AstroTurf that allows for it. I mean, I can roll it up. It's pretty lightweight, and so there are also these practical things that allow it to get bigger, and allow for this feeling to like continue to kind of jump into it a little bit. So.
And I think we've also talked about this this difference between looking at these as kind of walls and as windows. That was a really important conversation for me, and kind of coming to understand the work a little bit better, because that notion of flatness in the work is something that is definitely helped by the flatness of the AstroTurf, the way that it sits so close to the wall and doesn't necessarily feel like an object, in the way that a kind of stretched canvas might. But then there is this kind of additional layer that pushes against that, of thinking about the way that you're incorporating willow or buckskin or buffalo hide or beads or corn husks into the surface, that actually kind of takes it back into that space of kind of objectness in a way. And there is, for me, a kind of really interesting tension that you keep negotiating between kind of object and view, between flatness and real depth, or even between the ways that we perceive them as kind of a wall, a window, etc. And one of the things that I guess I'm really interested in is how, like, that moment when you started to kind of say, okay, I want these other items, the buckskin, the willow, etc., to kind of come into the work. Where did that happen, and how did that feel?
Yeah. Well, first, I like the word tension, and I think the work really does have so much tension, and it's like everything is placed just so it's almost something, but it's not quite, and then it really allows it to become its own piece. And so that's why shapes are rarely repeated, because there's a sense of autonomy that I want every single work to have. And so there's, and the way even I made the decision that the yarn sticks on top of the AstroTurf. So in process, it will stick. I can move it around. And so there's a real freedom and play with that. And then I kind of go back in and initially glue it, and then it's all hand sewn down. But it's that laying on top where you don't know, is this a drawn line? Is this supposed to be a textile, but it's not quite? There's something with it sitting on top that kind of relieves it of hopefully many different categories. And I think that's the beauty in abstraction, is getting to kind of go between categories. I think I've also wanted to push a lot of these expectations of what does it mean to be a Native artist? What does it mean to make abstraction? And so there is a lot of tension in many different ways in the work, and that is, it is meant to be there. And I like the fragility. I like that everything feels like it's just not, it could just come off, but, and I think that is life. That that kind of alludes for me to imperfection. It talks about life, and so the feeling that the work feels lived. That it is living, and how can the artist's hand come in, and how can edges be irregular? So, these are all like part of the process and the things that I'm thinking about and have been over time. And then in terms of bringing in cultural specific materials. So we had just moved from Beaumont to Los Angeles, and so AstroTurf was fairly new to me, and I was working outside. We had a little apartment with a backyard. I was working outside, And I started making baskets, actually. And part of the initial drive to make the baskets was sort of my questioning of, okay, you know, how am I going to, we've continued to live in these kind of urban environments, how am I going to share my culture with my children? You know, what does that look like? And kind of what are these choices we're making to live far away from family? And I didn't really have an answer, but I knew what I would start to do is I would just start to do some specific cultural practices like basket making, planting hidatsa gardens. So I planted a hidatsa garden in our backyard in Los Angeles. I mean, it was very small, but it was all with heirloom seeds in a little box. So, but it was that relationship of working outside and, you know, soaking willow and starting to work on these baskets and having this garden. So I would tend to the garden. I would, you know, make a mark on a piece and go back and do something. And I loved that relationship back and forth. And really, like much of my art, the personal, you know, it comes in. The kind of what's happening in my life comes in. And whether or not everyone needs to know about it is one thing, but it informs some of those decisions. It informs some, maybe even colors or shapes or things like that. But in this case, it really informed the materials that I was adding to the work. And so all of a sudden I was making these willow baskets, and it was just a really simple, easy way of, oh yeah, the willow should come onto the astroturf, you know, and oh, this is how the buckskin could come on. This is how the buffalo hide, you know. My father, I grew up in, my parents hunted, or my father hunted, and we had buffalo and deer, and it was very normal for us to, he would tan hides, and so this was also a really common material in how I was raised. And he would always, kind of after I had, you know, left home, he would send me these hides, and he was like, use this in your art, use this in your art. And I didn't know how yet, because I wasn't sure how I wanted to do that. And so it's really, actually some of these pieces are hides from him, but so I kept them for years and years, knowing that I would find the time and the way to use them. So anyway.
I think if we can, I mean, even just in terms of thinking about these as living objects, right? I definitely had a moment when I was kind of writing text around the exhibition, and I shared this with you, that I was like, it feels really important not to call them objects, but to kind of think of them as having a kind of mind of their own. And indeed, I can actually share that the installation of them, while, you know, I think we did a really great job with our crew, they may not be as kind of as right-angled as you think. And so there is a certain sense that you start to get them on the wall and you stretch them and you think, oh yeah, here's this side, I'm gonna hang this straight. And you put it up and you're like, oh, well, that bottom doesn't look so good. And we had a fun conversation about this where you said, you know, you want people to have to deal with the work. And to have to actually kind of make those adjustments. And it helps to kind of understand what the form is. So even if we look at mapping the territory behind us, this kind of straight line through the center is actually a level line. But if we look a little bit more carefully at the top and bottom lines, those kind of veer off a bit. And it's that sense of liveness in them that I think really offers them also an animation and a kind of energy that's all their own.
Well, it's so subtle. I mean, and even this work, some of the more recent work has more marks and color than the earlier pieces, but they're all very subtle. And the slightest addition of something or the slightest movement can change the piece, and it changes how it feels. And so one thing that I have been encountering now with people installing my work is they're like, what is straight? You know, how do I hang this because it feels off? But I do love it. I love that they have to deal with it. And then actually they notice if they just shift something, oh, that feels right. So what does feel right? And usually there's always a point, because where there is something in it that is the straight edge, and it's generally in the middle, because that kind of comes at the end. It becomes like the real balancing portion of the piece. But Dean, we rehung this when I came in, because this, it just felt flat, like it was a little bit to the right. And so once we just raised it, it became more alive. It really had a different energy. But yeah.
I think too, if we can kind of sit for a moment with this kind of idea of tension that's in the work. I think those tensions between abstraction and representation are also, they have an analog in a way with thinking about the relationships between kind of modernism and the ways that modernism kind of exists within the work, and specifically thinking about kind of modern abstraction, and also with the way that your identity as a Native American artist is in there as well. Because one of the things, and we've had this conversation, is that people will say, oh, you're a Native artist, and want to kind of keep you in that space. And instead, that feels like a real limitation for someone who has such a love for earlier abstraction and abstract painting. And I wonder if you can kind of talk a little bit about maybe other artists who you've thought of who feel like they've been influences over the years as you've kind of explored your own particular version of abstraction.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can easily talk about Richard Tuttle, who was a very early influence. I grew up in smaller communities, and I thought that art meant representation. I thought it meant landscape, portraiture, things that personally I just are not, don't excite me as much in terms of making. And so it was really, once I moved to New York City, I did undergrad in New York City, and that was my education into Western art history, really. And it blew my mind. I mean, I was like, Richard Tuttle was so exciting and made so much sense to me, and like the real letting material be material, and this playfulness as well. I mean, playfulness is really an important aspect of my work. And so that was that. I mean, sometimes with these questions I forget everyone's names, but Richard Tuttle is certainly one. And but the truth is, as I was making my work too, like, I grew up around abstraction. Abstraction is a way of thinking, and the way that I was raised in terms of spirituality culturally through my Mandan Hidatsa side. I'm also German American on my mother's side. But through my father's side, a lot of that way of thinking was, material can go from practical to spiritual. It really just depends on the context. And so once you think about context, and once you think about how you're approaching something and using it, and thinking about like how much it changes, and that idea is so exciting to me. And I think abstraction gets to do that as well. Mm-hmm. So.
And it has even kind of entered into the exhibition in broader ways, right? Like, we've definitely had some conversations about things like parfleche bags, mm-hmm. and the decorations on parfleche bags, and the ways that the geometry of those, but also the kind of sense of hand mm-hmm. that's in them, informs the ways that you're kind of making moves in your own work. But I think also one of the things that's quite special about this exhibition was that we're showing a series of drawings that you made. There are 13 of them in the gallery just to the side of us. And one of the things that felt really special there was we made this selection of drawings, and then you came through and you said, can we hang those in a diagonal line going up the wall? And I thought, yeah, I've never seen this before. It seems like a really exciting thing to do. But instantly I was also able to connect that to the sense of gesture that happens in your work. And I think if we kind of revisit that sense of scale, that sense of gesture of kind of being able to move through something, or for us physically as audience to be able to kind of project ourselves into something, is really influenced by that sense of gesture. And I wonder, and I want to talk a little bit about color, but I wonder if you can kind of talk a little bit about what gesture feels like in your work. And
yeah, I mean, I think gesture is the extension of the artist. Like, gesture is like the transfer of energy. It's like where there is life. So back to this idea of like an object having life, it's that moment. And so how can something transfer some sort of energy or have any sort of meaning? And so I have hundreds of drawings, and this is my first time showing them. I don't show them, and mainly because I don't feel like I need to. It feels like an intimate part of my practice that has no expectations around it. So there's a real looseness, there's a real freedom to how I approach it. And because of that, I like to just kind of keep them a little bit close. And I actually applied to grad school with my drawings. Like they're just like this one key consistent thing. Actually, when I moved to Beaumont, Texas from San Francisco, I didn't have a studio, and I worked in this shed in the backyard of my husband's grandparents' home. And I mean, it's very hot there. And so, and it's like a tin shed. So I would wake up at like 5 a.m. and I'd be like, okay, I can maybe get in like 2 hours of like work. And so I would go out there and work on my drawings before I couldn't stand it anymore. So they have been, while I've kind of searched for everything else, and I've searched for material and searched for how to, for what this is now, it was the drawings that were this kind of consistent thread, and this way to explore shape and material and the transfer of the artist to gesture and to line, and so.
The drawings also feel to me like, and I'm really honored that you would show them with us, feel like a real nice condensation of the ways that you're approaching your practice. Because in some of them, we see you kind of recording a landscape, something that feels more like, okay, I'm gonna sit, I'm gonna look at the landscape and make a drawing of it. In other senses, we see kind of things that resemble the paintings in their composition. And we don't know whether the drawing came first or you're recording a particular composition that might feel really special. That sense is there. But then there's also a kind of much broader sense that feels maybe more energetic. Things that look like geysers coming up, or waves going across water, or wind blowing through, or even particular instances of light. And that, in that way, the drawings kind of allow us to see a number of ways that you're approaching abstraction, and kind of being able to incorporate narrative, but also to kind of keep it at a distance somehow. And that tension, I think, is very much a place where the work resonates.
Yeah, I think that's because they become, I don't sketch in preparation for work. I actually love the kind of puzzle of solving every piece. Like that is very exciting for me in the studio. And so I feel like once I sketch it, that's it. There's nothing to kind of push there. But the drawings become that way for me to explore all these ideas, and that's what they are. So.
Yeah. And so then I want to just, before we open up to questions from our audience, I wonder if we can talk a little bit about color in your work. Because I think there too, we have these relationships between things that feel like they're from the natural world, but things that also feel like they're from beyond that. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the ways that you're approaching color in particular.
I would say color is hard for me to talk about because it's kind of the one most intuitive aspect of the work. It's just like a pure response in a lot of ways. But everything is kind of based on, I usually have 3 pieces up in the studio at once, 3 or 4, and I kind of work back and forth. I take a lot of time to sit and look and play and move around. But color is I know it can be very influenced by the kind of place I'm in. When I was living in LA, I think things got a little bit more colorful. I have some clear examples because we spent 3 months in Newfoundland on a little tiny island, which was incredible and so peaceful. And all of my colors became so much more muted and quiet. And so, the outside is absolutely coming in, and I let it kind of help dictate what the pieces are going to be. But then also it depends on the shape. Is the shape kind of angular? Is it going to be a little bit more rounded and softer? And so then, okay, I think about what is the feeling of that piece? What feeling do I want it to exude? And so is it gonna, does like a feeling of power come in like a deeper, darker color? And then how do you soften that? And so it really becomes these kind of back and forth of how to change the feeling of the shape, and where does it need a softening or a hardening, or where does it need a pop of color to kind of like bring some energy. And yeah.
So it's that balancing and tension.
It's the balancing, and it's all about the balancing and tension. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if there are any questions from the audience. And I think Michelle will bring the mic around if you have one.
So we all know there's green, AstroTurf, and some basic colors. You found blue at Home Depot, which is a little surprising, but where do you procure all these colors? I assume there's not a Monsanto outlet store here in St. Louis, or do you create the color on top of the AstroTurf to create these unusual colors?
So this is a good example, because this teal so I use acrylic as well, but there's basically like 8 colors I'm able to get right now, I think, and I get them from AstroTurf dealer Event Carpet Pros in Southern California. But it's based out of Dalton, Georgia, is actually where the AstroTurf company is. I hope to maybe at some point make a specialty color with them. So if anyone knows any AstroTurf folks. But yeah, right now I'm kind of bound to the certain colors they have, and then I do paint on top as well.
I wonder if you can talk about your process. Like, do you do tests and then apply it to the larger piece, or do you just like go for it? How does it work?
I just go for it. Yeah. It becomes this back to like a balancing act of really trusting my gut, and also knowing if something didn't go right or that doesn't work, then okay, I can change the outer shape, and then this fixes it. So it's a lot of going for it, because that's exciting too. It's exciting to like, maybe there's a failure, or maybe it's not going to work, and a little stress in that. And so I think I like that. But I also have limitations. Like, I can't just apply a bunch of coats of paint, because then it gets really thick and then it gets really gross. And so then, and AstroTurf it's a tough material. I mean, I think it's an ugly material. But the part of that is like making it beautiful. What happens when you put it on the wall? How can you make something ugly beautiful? How can you use these really common materials that everyone can access and transform it? So I'm going off, but basically I go for it and see what happens. So.
Hi. I'm wondering if you can talk about your imagery and the compositions. Do you work from research or specific objects that you're referencing, or is it kind of the amalgamation of your cultural experience?
I think it's really an amalgamation. And I think that's what was so helpful about the drawings for so many years, is they were a way for me to get out these shapes really fast, these shapes and these compositions. And so I know, I mean, really a key thing for me is everyone comes in with their own references, but when a piece is finished for me is if I can look at it and I can't place it. And so, that, yeah.
I have a question. How do you start a piece? How do you decide, I'm going to start? You know, what's the foundation or the thought process in that?
I mean, it depends. Right now it's a little bit more based on, maybe I have an opportunity to work in a specific space. And so really now sometimes it's dictated by like, oh, what are the space restrictions? Like how high can I go? Things like that. But it's also, kind of back to Dean's question about scale is I love making large work because it feels like it encloses you. It feels like you can go in. It feels like landscape and expanse. So there's no, and sometimes it's dictated by my own personal like studio space as well. But for the hanging piece in the middle of the room there, I built a stretcher bar in the backyard of LA, like a 12-foot tall stretcher bar, and hung that piece because I didn't have the space to do it. And so I worked outside there, but it's so, I guess to answer your question is that there's many different factors for how to really choose a specific size and scale and starting place. But sometimes it's starting too, like with how much the AstroTurf limitations as well, like what kind of size I can get it in. But generally I work with kind of in my wingspan almost. So like there's a lot of like 6x8s, they're now getting a little bigger than that, but kind of what I can fit between my arms, so. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I had a question about the drawings that you shared, and thank you for sharing those with us. The paper is very beautiful, and I noticed there's quotes on them. Is that something that you selected, or was it just pre-existing on the paper? And then is there any interaction between the drawing, the paper, and those quotes?
Thank you for that question. It was pre-existing, the quotes. So that notebook, it's like a 100-page notebook, and it was gifted to me by another artist at a residency in Wyoming, actually. And she used to have a paper store, and so she had all these kind of rare, different types of paper. And so they're not in response to the quotes. I mean, to be honest, when I'm drawing, I don't even like see it. It's like some weird thing where like I don't see the words. But I actually like just visually, like I like the kind of relationship between the two things, so.
And we're showing only 13 of them here, but the notebook itself has 100 pages, and you've said that you hope to eventually make 100 drawings and then turn those into a facsimile edition book, which I think is an exciting thing that we can all look forward to.
Thank you for the conversation. Such a great way to open this exhibition and start the weekend. I wanted to return to one of the questions about your inspirations and native art as a framework or category and its limitations. And because I think that's an idea that's worth unpacking a little bit more. So can you just talk about your experience with the category of native art?
I guess my experiences, I grew up in national parks. My father worked at places like Mount Rushmore, Little Bighorn Battlefield. He was one of the first Native American superintendents at places like this, and really changed the course of the education and exhibition programs at these national parks to make sure and provide a platform for the Native communities in these places to have their stories be told, to be more involved. So I give this background because that's how I was raised. I was raised in history. I was raised understanding my culture, but also understanding the kind of nuances between the government, between tribes, between relationships, and kind of watching that, as a child, but like being very much in that world. And so my framework in terms of like cultural art is actually much more on the spiritual side. It's much more based in whether it be objects for dancing, the regalia for powwows, or more traditional items that we don't even really use anymore, like parfleche bags. Of course you can use them, but they had their own uses at one point in a more of a traditional context. So my framework for art was very much that, and that is very specific. That is, you have to have certain rights to make certain objects. And so for me, that belongs in, I don't want to bring that into contemporary art world, if that makes sense, because I really respect the rights and the ways of how to do that properly, in terms of in more of a community and family aspect. But there's a long lineage, right, of Native artists who come from many different tribes, and they have many different ways of how they make art. Or there's painters who are talking about contemporary issues in Native communities, and or there's coarse abstraction as well. But I wanted to kind of give a framework for how I was raised, and so how I kind of like see those two things differently. And so then to think, how can I bridge the two things without misstepping on making something that I shouldn't be making and selling in the world? And then how can I, bridge abstraction with also these materials that are important to me and that do carry a lot of meaning and signify people and a culture and a place. And so then I go back to landscape a lot, because for me, that's what holds it. Like, that's where the beauty of this place holds all these people and like all of our spiritual sites, and just like the land holds everything. And so then I think I go back to land a lot, because it is a place where I can explore a lot of those ideas as well without being super or overt in one direction or not. So, yeah. Anyway, hope that answers.
One more question up front.
Oh, sorry. I was reflecting on the answer.
Can you talk a little bit more about your relationship with your husband and whether or not that, because I think about like artists doing things so like by themselves, but who you have that like creative back and forth with, or like, do you like this like that, or they just show up and say, yeah, great, how can I help? So you talked a little bit about like how he was helpful in your process, but was it more so like just allowing you the space for creativity, or was there also active process or collaboration and when it comes to romantic relationships and artwork?
I love this question. Thank you. I've never gotten this question before. So my husband's an actor, and he primarily in theater, and so on one way he understands like a love of craft, and that's something we both share, and so there's like a pure support. Like he really gets the need to go to the studio and be here today and do these things. But he is absolutely someone, like if I'm like at a place, there's always these kind of steps in the process of like starting something and it being just so exciting, because there's endless possibilities, but there's always a point where things get bad and like the work looks bad, and I'm like, oh shit, this is, and so I'll be like, Michael, you've got to look at this, like, what do you think? And now he knows my practice so well that like he actually like gives amazing insight. So yeah, he is absolutely a part of it, besides just helping, just domestic stuff, so he comes in and he sees the work as it's being made, which is really nice. So yeah.
Excellent. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us. And I want to remind everyone that Misa Jeffries will come up and talk a bit about the activation of Haegu Yang's mound vehicles. But I really want to say thank you, Teresa, for all your effort and for your beautiful vision.